Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Dance Teacher Pep Talk. I am your host, Amanda, and I am so glad you are here. This is a space for dance teachers and anyone interested in teaching dance who is looking for motivation and fresh ideas. As teachers, we spend our days motivating and giving pep talks to our students, and now this podcast is a pep talk just for you. We hope that it helps to ignite new ideas and even work through some deep dance related thoughts before you head into the studio. Thank you for your support, and now let's get into today's episode. Hi, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Dance Teacher Pep Talk. I hope that your week is off to a great start and that you are having a really good day so far today. And I'm so glad that you have made this podcast a part of that day. And so today's episode, I think, is going to have really helpful tips about how we can look at revamping our warm ups. At this point in the year, we are really full swing into what it is that we're doing. And we're also at this time of year, maybe embracing the season of fall or getting ready for Halloween. And so this week, definitely check back here on Thursday as well, because Thursday's episode is going to be all about different Halloween inspired exercises that you could use in your classes. And a part of that is actually a warm up idea. And so we'll get into that a little bit later. But this is a time of year where, when we're in this flow, when we have started getting a good routine down in our classes, there comes to be a point where, I mean, I'm speaking personally on this, but sometimes I get a little bit bored of my warm up. And I don't necessarily want to change it up right away because we've just gotten in the flow of it. We are just finding our groove. And so instead, I have really over the years compiled a list of different warm up ideas where maybe one week I'm doing the warm up that I had planned for that year. And then maybe the following week, I throw in one of these different warm up ideas to help not only your students trying out different things and for them to get to experience something different, because it also kind of keeps them on their toes. If we have a set series of warm ups that we do from week to week, that's awesome for, repetitive growth and skill building, but they might also get comfortable within the movement. And so when we get comfortable, we sort of just like we fall into rhythm. And sometimes we may not work as hard as we did when we initially were taught it. And so changing up the warm up can be really good for them because it's a way that we can kind of keep them on their toes, but also achieve the goals and things that we're hoping to do. And also, I'm, speaking personally on this, but sometimes I get tired of giving the same warm up week to week and going through some of the same corrections or talking about similar points. And so for me, instead of just consistently driving those points home and working those particular movements that we're doing, it's important for me to change it up because it's not just for the students, but it's also for myself because sometimes when I change it up, I get a very fresh take and a fresh look at different movements or different movement patterns. And it really helps me to then continue the students along with even other specific feedback based on changing up our warm ups. Now, I should also start this off by saying that I believe so strongly in the importance of a warm up. And I am also of the mindset that the warm up is not just for the body. The warm up is also to get our minds ready for the movement and for the sequencing that's happening ahead. And it's also for our souls or our spirits to really just kind of get into this zone and into this mindset that this is our dance class, whether it's an hour class or whether it's an hour and a half class, whatever it is that you have for time, you can always cater a warm up to a specific range. So like in a hour class, maybe you're doing a 15-minute warm up. In an hour and 30-minute class, maybe you're doing a 30 or 40-minute warm up depending on what style of class that you're teaching. And so with the warm up, I mean, when we think about warm up, a warm up is what is preparing you for the movement ahead. And so that's why I said it's for me, it's not just about the body, though that is like probably the biggest component of it, but also for our minds and for our souls. And so today's ideas with revamping your warm up automatically start to warm up the mind in a new way. Because if your dancers are coming in expecting you to be giving the same warm up that you typically give, their minds are just kind of going into that like that mode, like, okay, warm up, okay, across the floor, okay, this. And instead, this is going to get their mind thinking on a new level, like, oh, we're not doing the same thing today. What are we doing? And so when you are creating your warm up and you're preparing this, revamping or preparing a warm up, I think it's really important to check in with yourself and look at, okay, what is warming up the body, what is warming up the mind, and what is warming up the spirit or the soul of the dancer. And I'm going to talk about a couple different ways that I do that. So for me, depending on the style of class that I'm teaching, the movement itself is extremely important for the body. But I also try to do things where the mind has to be thinking. So whether it's coordination, whether it is timing differences, or maybe doing something and then reversing something, that's really getting like the mental side of it also engaged and working. And then for the soul side of it, what I tend to do is just check in with the dancers in the beginning. So, no matter what style of class it is that I'm teaching, I always start off with, okay, this hour for or hour and a half for your class, we are focused on staying within our zone, staying within what is happening around us, and just being really mindfully aware that this class is what we're doing. Because I know that, like, okay, that makes sense, right? That's why we're here. But a lot of the time, these dancers are coming in and they could have had a really tough day at school. They could have had a great day at school, but then they're also thinking about the homework that they have to do later. So for me, it's really important that I always check in with them to remind them that, yes, you're going to have all of that later, or you had all of that before, but right now, within this class session, it's all about whatever style it is that you are teaching that day. And so, depending on your class, maybe you do a choreographed warm up. And I love the consistency of a choreographed warm up for the reason that it first of all, it challenges them when learning it in the beginning, but then they're also working that really important factor of repetition, and it's really getting their muscles programmed for the class that you're teaching ahead. The muscles, the bones, the connections, everything, just everything that's involved within it. And so choreographed warm-ups, I think, as a pro of those, like a positive of those, is just that it may be challenging in the beginning, but you can really see how the dancers grow over time with it, because you're going to see when they are sinking deeper into it or when they're reaching new levels of skill progression within the warm up itself. So I do feel choreographed warm ups are wonderful. The other thing about warm ups too is your warm up more dance style focused, or is it more conditioning style focused? And I feel that both have an important place in the dance classroom as well. So for dance style warm ups, I'm talking about, like, say in your jazz class, we are starting off with something that's getting the blood pumping. Then we're moving into maybe some upper port de bras work, some release work. Maybe we're going into our plies, our tendus. Maybe we're going into some lunge exercises, things like that. Things that like look like they could be taken from the ballet bar and changed up. So dance style warm-ups are really wonderful because it is, again, practicing the modality of movement that we do in our classes anyways. But to counter that, I also feel that doing a conditioning style warm up is also very important, because conditioning allows the dancers to then get more of their cardio, strength, and stretch focused work and apply that into what they're doing. And what I particularly like is a functional strength conditioning. And the reason for that is, when you hear the term functional strength, to me, that means that we're strengthening in function of the movements that we're doing. I can only speak on my background with Pilates in this, but when we are doing our dance movements over and over again, say we're leaping a lot, or we're doing our turns, or we're doing extensions, things like that. If we repeatedly work that skill with just that skill in mind, it's going to, in a way, get fatigued, I feel. I mean, if we're just repeatedly doing something over and over again and trying to achieve it with the same skill and the same measure that we're doing over and over, even to me, like, as a dancer, if that was me, I would myself get bored with that. So, can we take those things? Can we take the leap? Can we take the extension? Can we take the turns? And can we do functional strength exercises that particularly connect to achieving those skills even better than we are doing? And so it kind of pushes the movement, it pushes the strength and just the facility of the body's ability to do these different movements. And so again, I'm speaking more like on a Pilates terms with that. So for me, like if I'm working jumps with my dancers, and I've mentioned this in another episode, but when I'm doing jumps, I always like to, instead of just doing jumps, I like to do functional strength in the beginning of class that directly is going to build and prepare them for the jumps that they're doing. So, functional strength is something so important that you can look at. And one of my favorite resources for that online is Sugarfoot Therapy. Sugarfoot Therapy is, you can follow their Instagram account. They do have some YouTube videos, I believe, but it is so clearly functional movement to the dance training that we're doing. And I really love all of the resources that they put out. So, with functional strength, I just wanted to take a look into what I would do necessarily in Pilates. And so, as a classically trained instructor, one of the things that we look at is the classic and true form, the traditional form, and where are we seeing similar shapes in space? So, what exercises have the body going into similar shapes or similar movement patterns, and how can we take that in different places in space? So, an exercise that is done laying down on the ground. How can we take that movement and bring it into standing? How can we take an exercise that is typically done on reformer or Cadillac or any of the Pilates apparatus and then bring it into the mat work? And so I also look at my dance warm ups in that way. And I do that with that functional strength component. So if I'm looking at pirouettes and we're looking at balance, I try to bring in functional strength movement that will directly help those pirouettes or the balance or the off center issues that we're having by taking different shapes in space. So, like one example of that, very basic, is just doing a plank position and doing parallel passes. And there are so many other things that I do to help that. But in revamping your warm ups, if you're finding that the skills that you're doing after the warm up, if you're seeing weaknesses in that or things that patterns that are having difficulty, see if you can then take a look at those movements and can are there functional strength exercises that then you can bring into your warm up that's going to help that later on in the class. And so that's one way to revamp your warm up without necessarily having to do a lot with it. Now, another thing about revamping my warm up is as I've grown through the years, I feel that I've really learned how to read the room. And there are two ways that we can look at this. So, reading the room. Sometimes I will go in with my class prepared, my lesson prepared, and I will sense the energy of what is going on. Maybe it's great energy, maybe it's low energy, but sometimes on the spot, I have had to change my whole class plans. And I think that just comes with time and also knowing your students. But if I'm coming in on a day where the dancers are really high energy, I want to make sure that my warm up helps to meet that, that it helps to give them an continue to empower that excitement that they have. And then on the flip side, sometimes if I go in and the energy is really low, I'm not going to necessarily slam them right out the gate with a really difficult warm up. Maybe we're going to ease into it a little bit that day. And I know there's also the mindset of like, okay, if the dancers are feeling low energy, let's get them going, let's get them excited, get them empowered in the movement. But I also feel that there's kind of like a building up to that. Like, I'm not just going to run in and say, all right, guys, get up and do some jumping jacks. Like, we're going to build up to that because the energy is low. So, reading the room can be really helpful because I don't know if you've ever tried the flip side of that. If you have just come in and continue to do your plans without reading the room. And sometimes what I've noticed when I do this, at least, is like the class does not go as I want. And the vibe just never clicks. Or it's like you're constantly fighting against something. And that is not necessarily helping you because you might get frustrated, and it's not necessarily helping the dancers either. So work together, and you will also, through time, find just a really good flow with that. And the dancers will trust, and the dancers will build their confidence too within the class experience itself because you're kind of not necessarily giving them what they want, but you're listening to what their needs are. And a warm up is so important that we are listening to what the needs are because, again, it's connecting that body, mind, and soul. And we need all three to be on that level for our classes to really have that smooth flow of a vibe. Now, sometimes when energy is low, revamping the warm up and saying, all right, guys, we're doing something different today for warm up is enough to help that switch. It's like, oh, what are we doing now? And so that is why I'm also making this episode today because I feel that there's so many different ways that we can help to reach them in different levels of energy. So, one way that I like to revamp my warm ups is by doing circuits or stations. And this is kind of almost like, I talk about like having learning centers at school where, like, okay, you're going to start at station one and then you're going to rotate to station two or whatnot. But in your room, having a set amount of stations created, say you have four or five, depending on like how many students are in your class, and having the warm up maybe that week be a conditioning style warm up. And maybe the first round of circuits, you're doing an alternating cardio and strength circuit. So at station one, you have a cardio move that you decide on. At station two, you're having some type of strengthening exercise that you're doing, and that kind of alternates. And then maybe you do a few rounds of that, and then maybe your last circuit is a stretching circuit, and you're doing this particular stretch here. But always remembering too that with a warm up, keeping it dynamic, we're not looking to cool down. So yes, we are at station one, but we're not just going to be like, this is station one, this is splits. It would be like, station one, let's work through second positions. Maybe you're having your moment in your straddle. Maybe you're doing side lunges. Maybe you're up in your grand second and doing some shoulder presses or things that just kind of change up the movement, but still give the stretch that they're hoping for and needing. But also talking about that with your dancers too, like the importance of dynamic stretching or dynamic movement active in your warm up. Now, for fun, sometimes I do themed circuits too. And so check back on Thursday because I'm going to tell you a little bit about a Halloween circuit that I do. But that's always fun. And they love doing the stations. It just changes it up. And I usually also, too, depending on the class, would time out the station. So I'd have like my stopwatch set up on my phone and say like, okay, we're doing circuits for a minute, and then after the minute you stop, change, and you kind of like facilitate that way. And the other reason why I like circuits too or stations is because you can also see and look at individuals in smaller areas of space. And so like if this dancer is having difficulty doing passe balances, you can go over and assist them, and you can and help to correct them in that motion and in that movement because again, I do like to use functional strength within my circuits when I can. Another idea too is in the beginning of class, if you're finding that your dancers are really sore or really like tight and tense to begin, maybe start off your class with a little bit of foam rolling. And if you don't have foam rollers or if they're not bringing them in, you could even get just a box of cheap super bounce balls that are kind of like dense, and you can do a rolling start to your class, some ball rolling. I do this on days when I feel that I come in and the energy is really low, or if the dancers are really sore. I just feel it's a way to get our bodies ready to move in a safer way. So you could definitely try that. Some other simple ways of changing up your warm up is changing up the space. Maybe starting if you have your dancers in lines for warm ups, maybe change the lines up. Like, okay, front line move to the back, second line move forward, and so on, and just keep the dancers rotating because changing the space can help that as well. Another way that I like to change up the space is by facing different directions. So if you're in your warm up, maybe changing it up so you're not always facing the front, you're facing side, you're facing back. Sometimes I like doing a plank warm up where I will like we roll down, we go to plank facing the front, and you have one thing that you do there, and then we roll up and we turn a quarter turn to the next wall, roll down, walk out into your plank, and here we're doing our parallel passes. Okay, next we're going to face the back or whatnot, and just adding like a different challenge or a different like level to what they're doing, but just changing the direction. Another thing with space is maybe starting across the floor. And I don't mean starting across the floor with skills, I mean starting across the floor with some cardio and strength. So let's start off by doing some walks. Maybe you're adding directions in there. If it's jazz, you can even stylize it. After that, maybe we're going to move into some triplets, some chassés, some side chassés. You could cater this to any age level. But the thing is, too, is if your dancers are older, don't feel bad if you're just throwing in some triplets and side chassés and front chassés and all of that because those are very important transitional movements and it also helps them to warm up. Maybe you even just have them jog across the floor. For strength work, what I like to do is plank walks or bear crawls, and then maybe like have like a little roll in between. I'll do lunge walks, add some balance in there. So you can take a lot of the movement and skills that you do within your warm up and just take it across the floor. And I've done also in jazz when I'm teaching jazz. Sometimes I add other challenges that challenge the mind with that, like maybe I add isolation as they walk. So maybe we're adding a head or maybe a shoulder, maybe we're adding a pivot turn, different things so that it's not just like one specific skill, but then we're getting the mind involved by adding in some coordination along with taking exercises in different space in the room, like taking the shapes in different space. You could also maybe in ballet sometimes change it up and do floor bar or bring in some floor bar ideas. So we're doing the movement. We are doing similar movement. We're still going on the goals of that class or of that style, but we're just changing where we're doing these things. And with all of these revamp ideas, making sure that we're still adding in what makes our warm up successful for our class. And so, reminding ourselves we are trying to get into the body, mind, and soul. We are making sure that we're getting the blood moving through the body, that we are adding in some functional strength, that we are stretching dynamically, getting the body prepared. If there are dance movements that are a part of our warm up, really making sure that we're creating different ways in and out of them at times so that we're not getting stuck or comfortable in one way. And, with ballet too, if you're going in and we're starting at the bar, maybe there's an exercise that you could incorporate to start that's a little different. Maybe we start off with some footwork. Maybe we're just working through the feet and then we'll go into plies and tendus. Or, like I mentioned, maybe we're going to do floor bar, or maybe we're going to work with some therabands or some props, things that will bring additional, like just additional fun or additional usefulness into what we're doing because it's not just fun, it's also useful. I absolutely love the Pilates Power Circle. I think that they are wonderful props as well to really get dancers to work their arms from their backspace. It also helps to give a really deep connection of core. So there are a lot of wonderful exercises that you can do using the Pilates Power Circle. And I know I'm only just naming a couple few, but I guess that could also be a part of revamping your warm up is there a way for you to bring in props to what you're doing, whether it is the super bounce ball or if you're using therabands or things like that, light hand weights, if you're wanting to add a little bit more into the functional strength that you're doing or the functional conditioning. And just knowing that those little changes, they don't have to change a whole lot of what you do, but that is helping the dancers to feel more on their toes and for you to feel like you're bringing a new feeling into your space as a teacher, new ideas. It feels more refreshing to teach. You're not going to feel like you're in the monotonous flow of your typical warm up. And it also gives you a better eye too on movement patterns or things that maybe you're seeing now in different exercises that have similar goals. There are really so many incredible ways that you can go in and revamp your warm ups. But also know that it doesn't have to be every week. We don't have to go into our classes every week and reinvent the wheel. But once in a while, when you're noticing, okay, we need to do something different, or we've been doing the same thing and we're starting to get too in flow, revamping the warm up is a great way for you to be able to do that. And if you're looking for other ideas of ways to revamp your warm ups or things like that, we have a lot of different content and classroom tips available on our Instagram at Dance Teacher Pep Talk. And I highly recommend you checking that out because I also post a lot of seasonal content. So, with the season that we're in, I've been posting a lot of fall exercises that you can do or in relation to fall. I've posted some of my favorite music that I like to use at this time of year for a variety of subjects. And so, if you're looking to just change it up a little bit here and there, definitely make sure you're following the Instagram because there are weekly tips that come out every Wednesday and occasionally on Fridays. Fridays is kind of like a miscellaneous day. So sometimes I do music on Friday, sometimes I have classroom tips or bonus talks for the almost like an exclusive episode of the podcast, but on our Instagram. So please check us out there. And just a reminder, if you are loving what you're hearing on Dance Teacher Pep Talk, please make sure to follow us on whatever podcast platform you listen. And if you feel called to rate or review the podcast, I'd appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I hope that you have a beautiful rest of your day. And I hope these activity ideas help you to feel excited about changing up your warm ups now and then. All right, thank you so much for listening today. And don't forget to check back here on Thursday.